Okay, so as you can tell, each one of these issues has many, many, many things we could talk about in it. So this is related to what we were just talking about, but the third issue was the relationship between density, housing types, and prices. And one of the things that a lot of people seemed interested in, especially when we did the code walk in the Zilker neighborhood, this came up, was how could the code facilitate the development of cooperative housing? So currently, the co-op that we visited in that neighborhood was at the end of a cul-de-sac, so it was a very large lot. It had parking. It had 17 bedrooms. It was built to be kind of congregate housing. It had a very large kitchen. It had several living areas. It had, shared bathrooms. That wouldn't be allowed under the current code. So, it's very affordable. If we wanted to foster the development of something like that, could people imagine a kind of co-op zoning, or how do people think that could work if that's something we want to have more of?
Okay, how could the code facilitate the development of co-op housing? Mr. Weir.
And just to clarify again, you're saying, I'm sorry, you probably already said this, but you're saying cooperative housing in the sense of maybe multiple family or different groupings of people living together?
Yeah, but so the way that it's being done in the few co-ops that we have in Austin, I think we only have 3 that are not student co-ops. They are governed in a very specific way. They're members of an organization that kind of sets the governance. So the people who live there manage the property themselves. There are many unrelated individuals living there, but they're living there kind of under a certain set of conditions and governance. And that's part of what makes it so affordable. So I think people, when we went on that walk, people were interested partly because they weren't even aware that it was there. Many of the people in that neighborhood, it seemed to really provide affordable housing and, they were good neighbors, or that was kind of the vibe of the walk. So we wanted to throw that out there and just say, well, right now there isn't a way to do that. Do we think there should be? What do we think would be the things that we'd have to consider or that we want the consultants to consider in coming up with a proposal for that?
Thanks for the clarification. I want to give Mr. Heyman a chance before I come back to Mr. Weir.
So just to clarify, so that particular case was in a single-family neighborhood? Because couldn't you build a co-op type in a multifamily designated area already? I guess I'm trying to figure out how, if we're not using opt-in and opt-out, how we could make co-ops possible in all different kinds of contexts, right? So could you put that kind of development in a single-family neighborhood versus a multifamily designated zone?
Does someone on staff want to address that? My understanding is if it's considered congregate housing.
Exactly. It's a very specific designation.
Group homes, yeah.
Mr. Guernsey?
Hi, Greg Guernsey, Planning and Zoning. Most of the, it's called group housing under our code. Fraternities, sororities are allowed, student cooperatives, but we do have some that are outside of that realm. Usually they're only allowed in more intensive multifamily districts. The lesser multifamily districts, they're not permitted. Our ordinance doesn't really speak to governance so much as it does allow the number of unrelated individuals to reside in one larger dwelling. We don't have that many of them within the city, and the majority of them have been located by the University of Texas because of the cooperatives and fraternities and sorority settings. We do allow them, but only in multifamily districts of a higher intensity nature.
Okay,
so I think the reason that I put this on here was that I thought that it was kind of a different animal than that. and that it does provide really affordable options for people. So
So how could we
that
make it work?
particular one and the other one I know of are, well, that one is in a single-family neighborhood. It is, but on a large lot.
Okay, Mr. Weir had his hand up first, and then I'll go to Mr. Sullivan.
Well, Mr. Guernsey answered my question. I was just going to ask how is it handled now, but seems kind of like a fun idea in general, just a comment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
So the real question is, how can you carve it out to be different from a fraternity or a sorority? I think when I was on the Planning Commission, we suggested age, but you can't use age. But obviously, if you could, and everybody was over the age of 30, you would be less likely to be a party house and everybody park their SUV on the lawn, et cetera. I'm not saying students would do that, but is there, I guess the question for the city would be, or for us would be, is there some way that we could carve it out so that it would be different from a fraternity or a sorority? For example, joint ownership of the property, having a governance, a particular form of governance, something that it doesn't, I'm trying not to discriminate against students, but just to say that they have to be respectable, respectable people. And I'm not saying students aren't respectable people.
Mr. Mitchell, it looked like you were about to say something. Did you want to respond to that?
Is a comment across the country when is this on?
Yes.
When I see co-ops, they're typically, the savings results in people live in their private square footage is a lot smaller because you're sharing kitchens, living spaces, and outdoor spaces. And the cost can be rather dramatic in its savings. So I think the difference you may be looking for is scale. If you're doing it in a residential neighborhood, I was in a fraternity one time, and we had 60 bedrooms. I think that may be a little large, sitting, one of those things. But scale may have something to do with that in terms of massing, et cetera, in terms of its livability.
Right. I guess the thing is, if I can respond.
Most of the co-ops I've seen, I've seen some in Seattle and some in a few other places, have been 8 to 25 in that range in terms of units.
Right.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan, did you
units,
wanna...
and I think they're usually one-bedroom units, but I don't know that.
Right. Well, that's the point. If we have a national consultant working with us on this, where does it work? How do you prescribe them so that they work within single-family neighborhoods or in MF1 zoning, whatever? So I think I would put this question to our consultant. If we are in favor of more co-ops, then what are the best practices to protect surrounding neighborhoods?
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Other thoughts on how we could make co-ops work within the confines of the code? You have about 10 minutes left, so...
I think it's also important to define the difference between co-ops and co-housing, and those are, yet another option in terms of co-housing where there may be a main building that has large kitchen facilities, but then there are individual units that then surround that main building, so that each structure doesn't have to be as large because the main building has the larger kitchen and other facilities, dining room and whatever. So I think both of them would be important to be carved out for the code. And I will kind of just acknowledge over here, disclaimer, I lived in off-campus student housing and up to 25 people, and when I was in college, and I think it's an excellent way to actually become politically aware and become future citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. Anyone who hasn't commented on this yet who wants to jump in? Ms. Moffitt.
I haven't commented on this. I love the idea of co-op housing. We actually have co-op housing in our neighborhood. I don't know if it's legal or not, but they're there and they're great. And it's a group of families who built the home together and they share common space, and it works really well. But I agree with Dave that if we are really going to talk about putting this into single-family zoning, we do need to get some best practices on this. And also, if we're already allowing it in MF zoning, maybe this is more of a thing that the city could put out some information on and encourage people to consider forming co-ops. Maybe that people just aren't doing it because they don't really know it's an option. So it may be more of a public information campaign where it already is allowed, and then work up to it in single family with some, pretty decent rules.
Thank you, Ms. Moffett. Any voices we haven't heard yet on item 3 here? Ms. Beeler.
I met with a co-op owner, and my understanding was that he, bought an MF3, I think, property, and just bought it and rehabbed it slowly because they do their own maintenance. And I think that their issue was that there just wasn't a lot of places zoned appropriately for them, and I think it was like MF3-ish, and I think it's also a really good opportunity for future housing policies when it comes to acquiring affordable or preserving existing affordable housing in terms of the Class C apartments that we have. We need somebody to rehab them, but also keep them affordable. I think that we really need to work with co-ops to try to make them viable and competitive, I guess, at the city level for that kind of funding.
Yeah. When we visited the one in Zilker, the people that we talked to who lived there did say, there's the one that was an existing apartment complex that was purchased and then converted to a co-op. And then the one in Zilker was built to be congregate housing, and they said it definitely works better if you've built it intentionally to work as a co-op. So, that one I think they had acquired from somebody else, and it was already congregate housing, so they converted it. But if we wanted to encourage people to develop something like that, I think it'd have to be easier for them to identify sites and know that it was going to be okay. But I think looking for best practices is a really good suggestion.
Any of our developer experts want to weigh in on how we might encourage developers to build those types of properties?
Oh.
Bonus programs. Just like we were talking about with unit lot sizes, and this is assumed to be, we're not calling it affordable housing, even though it's co-op, but it's affordable housing and reducing parking requirements. And so, starting with construction costs.
Thank you. Ms. McKinney had her hand up next.
There are co-housing developers, across the country. Certainly the consultants could speak with them and find out more. So it is kind of a unique development niche, and especially for co-housing, and that they, in other words, you have to kind of learn that niche just like any other development niche. And there are different groups all over the country that do that.
Well, even here, we have one fellow has been coming to a number of our meetings. He's not here tonight, but
right. But I'm saying people that have been successful, that's their consultancy. They'll come and help groups, and do this around the country.
Thank you. 4.5 minutes left. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Okay, anyone at all?
And we might find that we take more time on another.
Okay, so our next topic is density and infrastructure, and this is something we've gotten a whole lot of feedback from the public about, and we've had some conversations, and this is reducing parking minimums.